Hi, I'm Lisa Fletcher, and you're in the stream. Today, controversial new media laws in Jordan threaten to do more than just stifle free speech. They could destroy Jordan's primary source of new economic hope. We examine Jordan's controversial new censorship laws. Just across the table from me is Malika Bilal. She's juggling all your live feedback as it comes in and getting it on the air. So, Malika, Jordan's been seen as a model of online freedom in the Middle East. I think there is legitimate concern, however, that these laws could really change that.
There is definitely legitimate concern, and there's one burning question that seems to rise to the top among our community members. That's represented in a tweet here from Zaina, who says, I think the fundamental question is what's being achieved by controlling the internet like this? So for those of you at home, if you'd like to answer the question or chime in on the discussion, tweet us with the hashtag AJStream.
To Malika's right is Khalil Jashan, a lecturer in international studies at Pepperdine University. Khalil, thanks for being here.
My pleasure, thank you.
I also want to welcome our Google Plus Hangout as well. Hey guys, thanks for joining us. We're going to be getting to your comments and questions really quickly. But for those of you who want to join future Hangouts, be sure to add us to your circles. Just go to the link that you are about to see on your screen. I promise you're going to see it. I lied. Oh, there it is.
يعني شغلة الحرية على الإنترنت هاي كنا نفتخر فيها قدام كل حدا. يعني مين ما كان وين ما كنت بالعالم لما يسألوك أنتم من البلدان اللي بيحجبوا الإنترنت يعني بتقدرش تفوق. لا أنا عايش ببلد ديمقراطي. يعني إحنا بلادنا يعني تفتح إيش ما بدك لأنه إحنا شعب ذكي أصلاً. إحنا شعب جداً ذكي ومثقف. نقدر نفتح على أي موقع بدنا إياه ونختار اللي بدنا إياه ونكب اللي بدنا إياه. ما تسحبوا هذا الإشي منا. ما تسحبوا المتعة إنه نفتخر برا بهذا الإشي إنه إحنا عنا بالأردن حريات مش موجودة ببلدان كتير حوالينا.
Since coming to power, King Abdullah II of Jordan has championed free and open access to the internet, and the country quickly became the Silicon Valley of the Middle East, a place where web developers and entrepreneurs could turn their vision into reality. Today, the IT sector in Jordan produces and manages 75% of all Arabic language internet content, and it represents roughly 14% of the country's GDP and produces a large share of jobs for its young people. It is seen as one of the few bright spots in a troubled economy. But free and open access to the internet in Jordan could be over. Many Jordanians were surprised at the king's endorsement of controversial amendments to the country's press and publication law. The amendments require online media organizations like these to apply for a license, archive all comments left on their site for at least 6 months, and then hold the owners of websites accountable for any comments left by their readers. The government argues that the changes are needed to protect people, especially minors, from online pornography. But critics don't buy it. Freedom House, Human Rights Watch, and Reporters Without Borders have all denounced these amendments and called the move an attempt by the Jordanian government to muzzle its critics and the media. So, are these new rules going to destroy the only bright spot in the Jordanian economy? And what does this move say about the broader path to reform within the kingdom? To help us answer some of these questions, we're also joined by Curtis Ryan, Associate Professor of Political Science at Appalachian State. He's written exclusively about Jordan. His last book, published in 2009, is titled Inter-Arab Alliances, Regime Security and Jordanian Foreign Policy. Curtis, welcome to the stream.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to start with you. You know, Jordan has long been known for its free and open access to the World Wide Web, its unfiltered access to the internet, and King Abdullah has literally traveled around the world promoting this. And now this seems to be changing. Why mess with a good thing?
It's a great question. I think it, as you said, it surprised a lot of people, a lot of reform activists in particular, and a lot of business people. And the campaign against the new law brought together a lot of people who are not normally on the same page. So I think part of the issue was the concern. There were some conservative parliamentarians concerned about the pornography issue, but that's actually, I think, been dealt with. There are parental controls and software you can get that the government is actually distributing for free if you want it. I think the other issue is really the dissemination of a very large number of electronic news sites that have become really popular in the country. More people are reading the electronic news sites than are reading print news. And there were at least some people in the regime who wanted to bring those under the same rubric that the print media already has. And the question was, well, how far does that extend? Does it include just news sites, or can it extend to blogs and Facebook and other things?
Khalil, what are the politics driving this decision? Because the king openly embraces the law, but then you have to wonder what's going on behind the scenes because he's been such a public supporter of open access.
There are many different layers to why now and why this type of legislation and why this type of control sought by the government. I think basically Jordan is at the cutting edge, I believe, of this phase of the information revolution. And it's struggling like every other country, including the United States. So when we talk about this clash between civil liberties or freedom of speech on the one hand and national security on the other. I mean, we are a country that's 230 plus years old and we're still struggling with that. And kind of 9/11 kind of exposed, if you will, our weakness in this regard. So Jordan is not immune to that. But because the fact that it is open, in a way, it's a victim of its own openness. It's a victim, in a way, of its own attempt to try to lead in that region, as we've heard thus far. So the dilemma, stems from what the king himself admitted. I don't know how many people noticed in his letter of designation yesterday of the new Prime Minister, Abdullah Mansour. The king said the following. Let me read you these 3-4 lines because they really kind of, encapsulate the dilemma facing Jordan. He said, history and national memory will record that the Jordanian Spring was civilized compared to others, characterized by a high sense of responsibility and awareness and a model of peacefulness. In this context, I, King Abdullah, emphasize your government, Prime Minister Mansour, responsibility to respect freedom of expression within the law and the right to peaceful protest without vandalizing public or private property or violating or undermining the rights of others. Diversity of opinion should be respected without compromising the country's security, safety, or order and the rule of law. This is the dilemma. What the king or the people around him, the security. I personally, I would like to venture and say, knowing the king, I don't think he's necessarily comfortable with this step. But I have a feeling that the national security apparatus in Jordan, which is in charge of securing the rule in the Hashemite kingdom, is the one that is more concerned. So they are, I think, going overboard in trying to achieve this formula that the king is talking about. And this formula is unachievable. Jordan is not the first nor the last country to attempt to do so. And I think it's going to fail like we did and like everybody else, because you either have freedom of speech or you do not have freedom of speech. It's an absolute. It's like pregnancy. You're either pregnant or you're not pregnant. There is no halfway.
Well, there's members of our community that agree with just that sentiment. Joe Common on Twitter says, control of speech cements power, which seeds tyranny, always. I'd like now to go to our Google Plus Hangout to talk to Lina Ejalat, who is the editor-in-chief of Hibber.com. And Lina, I'd like your thoughts on whether or not you think the king is giving the right message and whether or not he's serious about reforms.
Well, to start with, Dr. Shashan talked about the king's message to the new prime minister, but in his thank you letter to the resigning prime minister, he mentioned this press and publication law as one of the government's commendable achievements. And I think we have to note that while the king has been saying a lot of really good and promising things about reform, but a lot of actions on the ground in Jordan speak to the contrary, unfortunately. And it's not just the press and publication law which attempts to stifle and restrict free expression on the internet. We've seen activists, we have around 18 activists who've been in jail for over a month now with charges such as insulting the king, undermining the regime. I think in the past few months, the regime in Jordan has felt maybe, let's say, more emboldened to kind of crack down on all this protest movement. Since the beginning of the Arab Spring in 2011, people have really broken, challenged taboos and, have gone and criticized, not just officials, but the king himself. And maybe there's some buying time at first in early months, but what we're seeing recently is that this whole kind of buying time process has come to, I don't want to say an end, but maybe they feel that they can say, okay, we're not going to give you this space anymore.
You mentioned buying time. There's also a tweet here from M. Ali who says, control of the media is integral to governments controlling the global perception of their countries. Daoud Khutab, founder of Amman Net, I'd like your thoughts on that.
Well, I think in general, what happened in the last few months is a reflection of the two faces of Jordan. On the one hand, you have a young king, he speaks very well in English and presents a very progressive tone of a country. But internally, there are a lot more forces, if you will, regressive forces that don't want a real fight against corruption, a real open media. They want a media that can somehow be controlled or at least be tamed. And so with the internet issue, I think these two faces kind of clashed, and the country found itself representing both the desire of almost 200 websites that want to show all faces of Jordan and want to unearth all kinds of issues on corruption, with the government trying to hush down the parliament and stop websites from talking about corruption. So it's these two faces of Jordan that I think with the internet law kind of came up, and I think the king, I think in a way, showed himself to be a bit more leaning to his security forces rather than his image abroad.
You know, the issue of media outlets and the way they reported demonstrations calling for change came about in a recent Charlie Rose interview that the king did. Take a look.
And what's very, very annoying by the press has been from day one is when I know that the figure this weekend is 850 and you read in the newspaper that it's 10,000. And so the press, the websites has been instigators in creating this tension. Unfortunately in Jordan, there has been, as you said, this undercurrent, but I think this has been fed by websites and unfortunately some members of the press that have been completely irresponsible.
Does that justify arresting them?
Not at all. Not at all.
Curtis, does King Abdullah make a fair point? Are there instigators out there who are working in a rogue manner that aren't adhering to any standards and essentially just putting out rumors that could potentially create chaos on the internet?
I don't think it's a matter of, I wouldn't use the word instigators, but I do know a lot of people I talked to in government in Jordan were getting increasingly annoyed with the electronic news websites because they were so popular, certainly, and because they were digging into corruption issues, and they were accusing them of being sensationalists and not being professional, not being well-trained journalists, not double and triple checking their facts and so on. But I really do think that the attempt to maybe curb these things and sort of bring things under control, maybe politically, I think the unintended effect, and I suspect that this is the part where King Abdullah is not 100% on board with this new law, is that it actually undermines his oft-stated economic positions which are all predicated on Jordan's openness, its willingness to be open for business, for investment, to the international community. And as one Jordanian journalist said poignantly, it's called a World Wide Web for a reason. So I think it's more, one of the earlier comments was that the intelligence services in particular, I think, have been pushing this issue, and I think that's true. I think it was not expected to contradict the king's own agenda, but I think it actually does.
Khalil, I want to talk a little bit more about the economics. Jordan being responsible for 75% of Arab content, 14% of its GDP. It's creating avenues for youth entrepreneurship. What are the threats that these new laws pose to the Jordanian economy?
They do not constitute a direct threat, if you will, but it's in contradiction with that state of mind. I mean, you open up the country and you create a whole generation of IT-focused Jordanians, and all you have to do is visit Jordan and spend some time with your friends and family and colleagues, business colleagues and academic colleagues and so on, to see that. It's quite visible. And little kids are even more sophisticated than kids in the States in this regard. Yet, all of a sudden, you come in as a government and tell people that you need to have a license or to have some form of accreditation in order to function or run a blog or a website of news on the internet. It's contradictory. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You're either part of this modern and information revolution, or you're not. And to try to be part of both, two worlds that are irreconcilable and contradictory is like putting the progress gear in Jordan in reverse.
Abed Shamlawi, I want you to listen to something and comment on it. We're talking about the issue of how these new amendments and the press and publication law poses an economic threat to business. Listen to this clip from Karabish.com. Wael Attili, the co-founder of the popular Jordanian blogging websites, explains the following.
ببساطة القانون بيفتح المجال لأي حدا على أتفه الأسباب وعلى أقل الأسباب إنه يقدر يسكر البزنس تبعي. هذا بيزيد من المخاطرة على العمل على الشغل اللي احنا بنشتغله، وبالتالي المستثمر بيصير يحسب 1000 حساب انه يفتح معي او يستثمر معي. فبالتالي لما انت بتحط شركاتك في خطر، لما انت بتهدد استثمارات المستثمرين، كيف انت بتتوقع انه تبني هاي الشركات، وكيف تتوقع انه هاي الشركات تكبر وتنمو؟
So Abed, basically Wael is saying that this law gives the government the ability to shut down websites for any reason and raises the question, how do you build a company under those economic circumstances, that uncertainty?
I definitely agree with Wael actually on his comment in terms of the law that the publications law is too vague. My comment earlier to another point was that you can fit a truck through this law. In fact, because honestly, there are areas of vagueness in the law. I think the law was meant to actually do something, but there is a spillover effect in the law that goes after or goes on to content creators and content publishers and online, not only newspapers, but also online content, online aggregators and portals.
Abed, what is the vague part to you? What's troubling to you?
The point. There is a main point in the law that it says online websites that deal with news and sharing news and broadcasting news need to register. It doesn't only say that; it says it in a way that it's. It says it as an example. So it says online content or online websites that, for example, deal with news should register, which is basically the point we've been having debates on. That they've tried, in our opinion, they tried to limit it to news, but not necessarily put that clearly in the law. So there is a spillover effect of the regulation, and we think the effect on it. Or from this law on different types of businesses under the ICT sector will be actually big. So that's what we think the effect will be.
Khalil, why shouldn't online journalism sites be subject to the same standards as the print media in Jordan?
The problem is the print media in Jordan has already been censored for many, many years, even though these laws have been reformed on a couple of occasions, but they still remain very restrictive. When you look at the same law that was just amended, the press and publication law, when you go back, 10 years back and take a look at, let's say, Article 3, Article 5, Article 38, within that law, they are full of restrictive laws vis-a-vis the printed media. What they are trying to do right now is kind of translate a similar or parallel restrictions on what was just described to us as a very vague definition of what constitutes an online website. And online websites, they can be something similar to a newspaper. They can be a blog. And the law doesn't make it clear.
Bloggers and Facebook out, but you're not so sure.
But I'm sure, I'm not sure because the law is vague, but I'm sure that when they start interpreting, they are going to apply it to both domestically registered and foreign registered. So we're going to, that's where, when I answered your question, whether this is going to harm the business, it indirectly it will, particularly in the implementation phase, because the clarity would have to become a necessity for implementation. It wasn't necessary to pass it and kind of force it through. But once they clarify these things, it's a disaster.
Well, Dawood, I know that you want to follow up here, but I'd like you to listen to this video comment from a member of our community in Jordan who agrees with the law. Have a listen.
I'm in full support with the new media law, as freedom of speech should be responsible and credible. There is no absolute freedom of speech in the world. This new law will set the grounds for a more credible media. It will higher the level of professionalism in our media organizations, and we will be able to compete on an international level. This is a step forward, in my opinion.
Does Dima have a point?
No, she doesn't have a point. Dima's statement reflects a problem in Jordan, which is that the government officials think that they should be immune from criticism. Instead of the average person being immune, they think they should not be, the journalists should not criticize them and unearth things about them. And this is a real problem in Jordan, that they don't have the understanding that a public servant has to be given, or should have a much bigger opportunity to be criticized, because they've chosen to be public figures. They've chosen to be on the block of being representing the people and therefore accountable to the people. This is the big problem. I think professionalism is something necessary, and I think we need to do it by self-regulation. We already have made an agreement among websites that we are willing to register websites, so if somebody does something wrong, you could sue them. But the idea of licensing 200 websites in which the government decides who to license and not, and by registering and licensing, you have to have an editor from the press association, which is controlled by the government. So the government wants to basically tame the media, and it's a chilling effect. The whole idea of this.
We have about a minute left. I want Lena to pick up on that point in our Google Hangout. Lena, what do you fear specifically for your site?
I think, like everybody said, the law is very vague. And the thing is, even if they keep saying that they intended for websites and they want to improve standards of professionalism, I mean, if we just picture the scenario of what's going to happen, if they attempt to block a website, this website can easily go to Facebook. It can easily, go to different platforms and get its message out. If they're worried about rumors, people can spread rumors, all over social networks. And once they start, what are they going to do? They're going to keep blocking, Facebook pages. They're going to block YouTube channels. It's very futile, and I think that's not the way. If what they want is more professional journalism, this is definitely not the way to do it. It's actually more harmful. And I think in Jordan, one of the biggest problems of journalism is the fact that we have the intelligence security apparatus meddling with the media, with journalists, and this is what taints professionalism, I think, more than what they claim.
All right, Lena, we're going to hold it right there and continue our discussion in our online post show. But first, we want to get to Malika, who's got a few other story leads that we're following.
Activists around the world are preparing for a day of noise designed to encourage a global protest movement. Leaders from groups like Occupy are calling on others to fill the streets on October 13th with pots, pans, and their voices. Each community will determine the focus of their protests for themselves. Organizers say the pot-banging demonstrations will call attention to problems the government fails to address, using a method that's hard to ignore. Our next leads from Texas, where 2 schools are requiring students to wear tracking devices. The device is embedded in an ID card. It's designed to increase attendance and allow teachers to know where their students are. The users of the social news site Reddit, where the story was posted, weren't amused. Vax writes, "What a wonderful police state we live in. How cute. They're trying to train the youth into thinking location tracking is normal." And lastly, fans of the fantasy novel The Hobbit are rejoicing ahead of the release of commemorative coins worth thousands of dollars. The coins count as legal tender in New Zealand, where they'll be issued next month. They feature characters like Gandalf the Wizard and Bilbo Baggins, as these pictures from the New Zealand Post show. Interest in the coins is expected to coincide with the premiere of The Hobbit film by New Zealand director Peter Jackson. And though some netizens were thrilled, others took a more critical approach. Abby tweets, "We issue Hobbit coins as us New Zealanders have nothing better to do than revel over the one great thing we made." Would you buy a Hobbit coin? Let us know. Comment on any of these stories using the hashtag AJStream. Lisa?
I know so many Hobbit maniacs who are going to be just jonesing for those coins. Stay with us because the post show is next at stream.aljazeera.com. On Monday, the future of warfare as military technology continues to progress and filter into civilian life. What legal and ethical issues arise? Send us your thoughts. Until then, we'll see you online. Welcome to the Stream's Online Post Show. We're talking about fairly strict new media regulations in Jordan. We're going to pick it up where we left off. Abed, I want to go back to you. You were saying that you believe these new laws are virtually impossible to implement.
Yes. If you consider the mechanisms that were addressed in the law, or basically how the law will be implemented, it's really impossible to track in terms of how do you block websites, for example. And how do you define local versus foreign, or how local versus international? Simply anything online is online. There is no definition of what's local and what's international. That's simply the point. So let's take, for example, that a news website was actually blocked in Jordan. That website could register outside the next day and continue operation. So what's the mechanism of blocking it? And blocking anything online, is it possible to block anything online these days? Simply, when you think about it, the implementation is quite impossible, to be honest, to be implemented.
You know, Khalil, I'm wondering what you think about this. You know, with regard to King Abdullah's speech yesterday, he was saying one of the legacies of Jordan is that it will have had a civil Arab Spring. Is it possible that Jordan, having truly free internet, acted during the Arab Spring as some sort of pressure release valve that allowed people to express themselves in a peaceful and civil way, and now by tamping down on that, he could actually be causing more unrest?
Sure, particularly if you are of that school of thought that believe that other countries that totally exploded, let's say like, you know, Egypt or Tunisia or Libya, in a way were deprived from that option of using the internet to network socially. Jordan, that was old news for young people in Jordan. They have done that for a long time. They have exchanged all kinds of views and news and ideas amongst themselves. So on the one hand, you know, while I understand in a way the rationale of the government when they say that they want to simply regulate, but not to restrict freedom of speech, but it doesn't make sense. I agree with what Abed just said. This is an idea that doesn't make sense because it's really unworkable totally, both on the legal level and on the technical level.
Well, Curtis, I have a comment here on our Google Plus page from a member of our community. His name is Ryan. I'd like to pose it to you. He says, not only does this threaten reform, but it risks another uprising, where it so far remained relatively peaceful. The king must be feeling lucky these days. Can you speak to this, what's clearly a delicate balance that the king is walking?
Yeah, I don't know about the issue of an uprising. I do know that there's a lot of anger and resentment in Jordanian society, and there's a lot of polarization, frankly, of people who see themselves as very reformist or very loyalist and so on. And we've seen that in street demonstrations and in a lot of these legislative battles. But what I want to comment on what several people pulled together a few things here, including Dima's comment in defense of the law. I actually agree with part of what she was saying in terms of the professionalization issue, that's a complaint. And I would put it this way, a lot of print media people have been self-censoring for a very long time, as Dawood pointed out, but a lot of electronic media people not so much, and almost to the point of recklessness from the perspective of maybe print media. And with the caveat that there are superb journalists in both electronic and print media in general, the professionalism issue, I think, is something you could complain about. It's just that I don't see any type of policy or legislation changing that issue. It's a question of education, professionalism, training, and so on. And also, more importantly, frankly, the general public. So I don't think the legislation will achieve what it is meant to achieve. What it will do is it does harm the country's reputation, actually. And since the country is not built on great oil wealth or massive military strength and geostrategic importance in that sense, its great uniqueness is actually its people. The Jordanian people, men and women, are among the most well-educated of almost any country in the entire Arab world, and that has a lot to do with the regime's own policies to support education and create openness. And I think there's a danger here that much of that will be unintentionally undermined in the name of trying to do things like rein in a few journalists for a few stray stories that went too far. I think the risks are frankly too great. And that we can actually rely on the high levels of education and knowledge of the Jordanian people so that the legislation doesn't have to be there as a corrective.
Khalil, whether or not you agree or disagree with the law, do you think that King Abdullah is genuinely trying to act in the best interest of the country, manage a difficult geopolitical situation, and really be genuine about his actions?
I think so. I think he is in a very tough spot, trying to reconcile these competing demands. He has different constituencies to respond to, as we just heard. Some of the demands of these constituencies are totally opposed to each other. Those who want to dwell on national security and maintain the country the way it is, and to protect their own interests, if you will, and those who have nothing to lose. They would like to totally change the system. And the tension arises, as we just heard. I fully agree with the analysis we just heard with regards to, earlier what Dawood mentioned. The answer lies in self-regulation. And self-regulation, though, doesn't come easy to the internet yet, because it's a wild frontier, and people are not going to volunteer restrictions as the printed media over centuries has developed. But the answer to me is in self-regulation, not in legislation, as we just heard, also in public education, also in involving the civil society in that public education. And Jordan definitely needs to put this item on the agenda for a national dialogue.
And the king says this isn't going to happen overnight. I
No.
mean, he's made,
He's
to
right
his
in that
credit, he's
sense.
made a lot of changes in the last 18 months. But he says this is a 4 to 5 year plan, and things are going to move forward slowly and in a specific manner, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah, but the answer, again, I mean, it's not like one side dictating the frame of reference. So maybe he wants, ideally, 4 to 5 years. The public might not be willing to give more than maybe 2 years. So that's why I suggest the idea of a national dialogue on this issue to reach some sort of a compromise where those who want only 1 month and those who want 5 years can maybe add the two and divide.
Aren't there something like 30 political parties in Jordan
Sure,
right now?
but
How do you-
so
how do you
what?
make that
That's
kind of
not the
dialogue?
only country. I mean, look at some of the European countries. Look at Israel. I mean, you get 2 Israelis in one room, they come up with 3 political parties. So it's not necessarily unique to Jordan. But again, the idea of democracy, and Jordan is a sophisticated society, they need to be able to cope with that if they can see a constructive role for themselves in the process.
Well, let's go straight to our Google Plus Hangout. Abid has a follow-up.
My point is, where do we go from here? What's next, to be honest? Obviously, there is some political movement in the ICT industry and in the media pushing on the law to be amended. I don't see the law being amended before the new parliament, which is like 3 months away from now. So between now and then, it's going to be a critical situation. As you guys said, the harm is basically in the reputation of the country and its attractiveness to investments, and in its attractiveness to new companies and newcomers. So this is where we see it in the next 3 to 6 months, harming the country. And maybe, hopefully, we can try and work on an amendment when the new parliament is in.
Well, Curtis, there's a follow-up tweet here for you that you mentioned that this new law will unintentionally undermine creativity of Jordanians. Mohammed on Twitter responds, he says, unintentionally, I think the idea is to intentionally stifle creativity and free thought in Jordan.
Well, I think that the motivation, I assume, was largely about the politics.
About 20
especially
seconds, Curtis.
Sorry?
You got about 20 seconds.
Okay, I think it was about politics and its volatility. And my point is that I think, and that may have been deliberate, but I think the undeliberate part, if you will, is the potential harm it may do to the economic development plans that actually are King Abdullah's main forte and his main goals.
Okay. Khalil Jashan, Curtis Ryan, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see y'all online between now and Monday.